the current condition of the safety of American drinking water, and the means to improve it. So here's an outline of the presentation. First question will be, how do Americans get their drinking water? The answer to that question is community water systems. About 87% of Americans get their tap water from this type of municipal system. There are various other systems, but this one's the most common, and that's what we're going to cover. In what ways is the drinking water unsafe to consume? We're going to cover a couple of possible pollutants and what kind of effects they might have. And finally, how can this problem be solved? How can the safety of the water supply be improved? We're going to look at a handful of solutions for each stage of contamination. So, how do we get our drinking water? There's a number of sources where water could be coming from. Could be above or below the ground, salt, saline, or brackish. There's all sorts of places. There's things like aquifers that are underneath the ground. Could be a well, but that's not part of a community water system. Community water system is typically going to be pulling from something like a river, a lake, a reservoir, stream, things like that. And then that will be brought into water treatment, which is a large process. Basically macro filtration, micro filtration, disinfection, but we'll look at that on one of the later slides. And then the community water system. So how is that water delivered from the treatment plant to the population? So the community water system. Now at the top left here, you'll see the water source. In this case, it's a nice river flowing down from a mountain. And that could be collected. If you could see my mouse here, there would be some sort of screen in this area, which would be preventing large objects. You could imagine anything that might be floating in the river, which would be preventing those kinds of things from entering the treatment plant, which could be anywhere down or upstream. So, like I said, there would be macro filtration down to micro filtration. So the main thing to keep in mind here is in the water treatment process is you're taking out very big things and then taking out smaller things, smaller things, smaller things, and then finally there's a chemical process during disinfection. Okay, coagulation here is a process where there's a certain reagent that's added. A chemical will be added to induce the process of coagulation, which is where dissolved solids sort of clump together. And that is where things will settle at the bottom here as they get heavier, denser as they collect together. And then the cleaner water on top will be permitted to move through. And flocculation is kind of similar, where the water is sort of stirred up and it will induce that process there. And furthermore, these things go through. And then filtration, typically there'll be a high powered pump either here or after the second stage of filtration. That'll be forcing the water through some sort of tighter membrane. And finally, you'll have chemicals added here, which will remain in the water afterwards, as you'll see. But the chemicals here could be something like hypochlorite, chlorine type chemicals that would be entering the water there. Next is the delivery source. So this is the pipe infrastructure that brings the water to the population. Now you can imagine here there could be pollution pretty much at any stage here, and we'll go through that later. So at any point in the water collection process, we could be experiencing contamination. At the water source, so before the treatment process occurs, we could be experiencing fuel contamination if we are downstream of manufacturing or anything like that. In that picture here, it looks like you're at elevation. So I don't know how much manufacturing you would have above you, but imagine you were somewhere like Louisiana, where you have the whole Mississippi River upstream of you and you're very flat. It would be hard to find a water source where there wasn't manufacturing upstream of you. So you might be running into something like that there. Agricultural runoff, and that could be runoff into the water source, and then affecting you downstream of that. So that would be agriculture upstream of you. And then also there could be storm drain runoff / sewer runoff, which could be resulting in E. coli, which is bacteria caused from fecal matter. And you could be experiencing heavy metals, which could be coming from any from a number of sources there, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. Now, in the water treatment process, we mentioned chlorine and coagulants. So if we go back here, there are chemicals added at most of these stages. So the coagulation chemicals are added here to induce this process of sedimentation, where the larger chemicals group together and get stuck at the bottom there. And that is an imperfect process. So you could be receiving downstream effects from something like coagulation, though it will be pushed through filtration following that. Now, disinfection. Excuse me, very loud vehicle going by. Disinfection is actually, you are intentionally leaving residual amounts of chemicals here at this stage. You're intentionally leaving amounts of, most of the time, chlorine to continuously disinfect the water as it travels to the to whatever point it is taken up by humans. And ideally, the chlorine could have dissipated by the time it reaches here, right? And so the ideal process is that the chlorine remains throughout the cycle here and continues to disinfect and prevent germs and bacteria and things like that from propagating inside of the water tower, and eventually it dissipates once it reaches human contact. But that is an imperfect process as well. What else do we have here? And cleaning byproducts. That's more like what we're talking about here. And each of these items here in the water treatment plant will require routine cleaning, and that as well, as you might have thought, is an imperfect process. So the water delivery infrastructure, these pipes could be made of polyvinyl chloride, PVC, and especially at high temperatures, or when the pipes are particularly new, when you still have microplastics in that substance and they haven't really been washed through yet. That's when you could be experiencing something like that. And BPA as well could be coming from any of those plastic materials upstream. A lot of these filters are going to be made out of things that are plastic, and the pumps are going to have plastic components. A lot of them will be metal as well, but like we're going to see, heavy metals are also a potential form of pollution. So, and there are lead pipes that are still in use today, though they are no longer being added into new pipes. Some of them are still in use. Now, what kind of effects could these things be having? This is a brief slide, which is potentially endless, but pesticides, especially glyphosate, produce a greater risk of cancer, especially BPAs and phthalates. These are microplastics, and they're hormone mimics, and they will be disrupting endocrine systems at high levels, as well as producing things like low birth weights, and potentially infertility as well, when highly exposed to those things. And if you'll notice here, these are the 3 stages of the water delivery process. So pesticides could be coming from agricultural runoff prior to the water treatment process. These things could be introduced before, during, or after the water treatment process. And then waterborne germs in the dirty pipes. So you could be experiencing vomiting or diarrhea from dirty pipes had not enough chlorine been introduced, and biological entities were allowed to propagate in those pipes before you consumed that tap water. Now, solutions. How can the safety of the water supply be improved? So we can consider solutions at the source, we can consider solutions at the treatment plant, and we can consider solutions in the infrastructure. Now, prior to the treatment plant, at the source, there are regulations in place to prevent wastewater and stormwater from mixing. And now they're similar words, but they are distinct from one another. So wastewater is water that is consider that black water, also be known as black water. So this is excuse me before I get mixed up here. So this is sewage, right? Wastewater is the business end of your toilet, more or less. And stormwater is a gutter in your street. So one is intentionally dirty, and stormwater may or may not be clean, relatively clean flood water that could just be coming from one side of the street to another, perhaps a creek overflow or something like that. So these are different kinds of water systems, and barring any sort of insurmountable amount of pollution in the area, stormwater ideally should have no qualms re-entering the water source, right? Because to the degree that it is polluted, the water source would more than likely be polluted that way as well, like I said, barring any insane amount of pollution. And wastewater is a completely different thing. Now that's where you're going to be experiencing a lot of cleaning byproducts coming from the household, because this is water that's been already put in the household, and a lot of times it will be coming from the treatment plant. So you're going to be experiencing all of those chemicals as well, and so they deserve different treatment. And so this regulation here, called phase 2, will be preventing excess stormwater from flowing into our wastewater treatment plants, which could pose a risk of exceeding its capacity during extreme weather events. So imagine a flooding event, was channeling water directly into our wastewater treatment plant. That would be inundating that supply there, and we would inevitably get a backup. Now, at the processing plant, is there a solution to the negative effects of hypochlorite, which are real? Hypochlorite can have negative effects on the endocrine system. Oh, I need a citation here. As well as resulting in vomiting or diarrhea, a lot of stomach problems coming from over ingestion of hypochlorite. And then long term, you could be experiencing hormonal issues. And the answer to that could be here: sodium dichlorocyanate, NaDCC, which has similar disinfectant properties and could lead to fewer instances of diarrhea. Now, in the pipe systems, this comes from the CDC, and they recommend that you should flush your pipes. Have you not used them recently? So if you leave a faucet off for a while and that water's just been sitting in those pipes for some amount of time, they recommend that you let it run and you allow those potentially viral organisms to move through those pipes there, because ideally the water behind it is clean. kind of in the similar way where a newer PVC pipe will have more contaminants in it. You're going to want to let those things flush through. And they also do recommend, or they mention under sink faucet filters, and there's also whole house filters that you could attach to where your water heater would go and things like that. But this is a pretty low cost practice here to just flush out anything that you haven't used in a while, in order to reduce your exposure to germs. Now, in conclusion, we covered the community water system, how it works, where the water comes from, what we do to it, and how it gets to us. In what ways are there problems? There are problems potentially at each stage, though they could be different in your community. And we discussed some of the effects of them and the safety of the water supply. How could it be improved? We got to mention activated carbon there, and a little bit more research to be done talking about that. But there are definitely solutions on the horizon. That's what I'm going to be adding to here. The solutions part. That's what we all want to hear about. Don't want to just hear about all the issues. Want to know how things can get better. So thank you for listening to my draft presentation. And have a good day or evening.